Right now I'm with the Kansas City Royals. I'm the senior advisor to the general manager, Dayton Moore. My career started in 1956 with the Brooklyn Dodgers as a player, and then I went with the San Diego Padres as a minor league coordinator, a scout, and eventually a major league coach with them for 4 years. And then I went with the Atlanta Braves in 1981 until 1996 as a scout, major league scout. And then after that, I went with the Tampa Bay Rays for 10 years and as a scout, major league scout, and then with Kansas City. Okay. So I've been very fortunate.
What areas have you covered as an area scout?
Well, my first area as a scout was with the San Diego Padres. Back then we only had like 8 scouts, and I had 13 states. I had from Alabama to Minnesota, straight up the middle of the Midwest. I had those 13 states, and I probably flew over more ball players than I saw getting to them. So,
tell me, Don, who are some of the ball players that you have scouted, and who are some of the ball players that you've signed?
Well, I started off with probably the one great one I signed, which I was very fortunate, was Dave Winfield.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, and Dave was at the University of Minnesota, and he was a pitcher and a player. So a lot of scouts had mixed feelings about whether Dave would be a pitcher or a hitter. And we drafted 4th that year, and I was very fortunate he was there. And personally, I liked him as a player, and the rest is history. I wound up signing him and wound up being a coach on the club with him for 4 years, and he's a great human being besides a great player.
When you saw him the first time, how did you hear about him?
Well, back when I was scouting, you kind of had the coaches you could call the schools. You had what we call bird dogs, people in the area who you hire for just to get information. And Dave, all of a sudden, he was a 3-sport player. He could football, basketball, baseball, and I knew he was in Minnesota, before I even saw him. But after I saw him, it was something else.
I know that Dave Winfield got drafted in basketball by both the NBA and the ABA, and in football as well. Did you know for certain that he was going to be play baseball, and how did you know that?
That's a good question, because you have to put your job on the line sometimes. But when you're drafted number 1 and you miss on him, that's not good for the club or anything. So that was a pressure point. We were in southern Illinois. Minnesota was in a tournament there, and I was at the same hotel Minnesota Dave's team was at. So I went up and knocked on his door, and I said, "I'm Don Williams. I'm with the San Diego Padres. I'm a scout." I said, "I'm here to watch the tournament, and if you don't feel like you want to talk to me, fine, but I need to ask some questions." He said, "What do you want to know?" I said, "Dave," I said, "I know you could play football, you could play basketball, you could play baseball, and I want you to answer me honestly. And you don't beat around the bush because I'm a baseball scout." I said, "If you were drafted by all 3, what would you do?" He said, "I would take baseball." And I said, "Well, that's good to know." I said, "Because you looked me in the eye and you told me that, I'm going to take your word for it, and we're going to see if we can't get you." But Dave was very honest. He said, I can play any sport." He said, "But I love baseball, and I think I got a longer career," and worked out.
Can you tell us about your first experience with a baseball scout?
Yeah, it was kind of, back in those days, we never didn't know what a scout was. I'm from Arkansas, a small town, 150 people, farm community, and somehow, the scout found out that I might be able to play ball. So I was down in the field picking cotton with my brothers and saw this big station wagon drive up. And my dad was up on the wagon waving, come up. We all went up there, and the guy said, "I'm Buddy Hankin. I'm with the Pittsburgh Pirates. I heard you could play ball." I said, "Well, I hope I can." He said, "Would you mind coming up in the yard and let me hit you some ground balls and look at you?" So we went up my yard, and he hit me some ground balls, and I was throwing into my garage, and he wanted to see how my arm. And I was in 11th grade, and about 20 minutes, he said, "Kid, I want to sign you." He said, "I'm coming back." He said, "You'll be hearing from me." And that thrilled me. I said, "Well, the Pittsburgh Pirates." And that was my first scout experience.
That's very good. You ended up signing with the Brooklyn Dodgers, however. Is that right?
Right.
So can you tell us about how that took place?
Yeah, that was another story. My cousin, I just graduated from high school, and he was driving an 18-wheeler hauling concrete. He was going to Michigan City, Indiana, on a trip. He said, "Go with me, you're not doing anything." So I rode with him up there, and all I had was a pair of blue jeans and a T-shirt. Kokomo, Indiana, and Michigan City, Indiana were playing a minor league game that night. He said, "Let's go to the ball game." So we watched the game, and he said, "Hell, you can play better than these guys." I didn't know what to say, and so he said, "I'm getting you a tryout tomorrow." So the next day we went down with the Giants, and after a few arguments, the guy said, "Well, get him a uniform, let's see what I can do." And he gave me some ground balls, took that in practice, and he said, "Yeah, I want to sign you, kid." He said, "We'll send you to Selma, Alabama, give you a Class D contract." My cousin said, "Well, how much money are you going to give him?" He said, "I'm not giving him any money, I'm giving him a chance." Back in those days, 4,000 was all you could get. So he said, "Yeah, that ain't going to work." So he said, "Since he's got that uniform on, can he go over and work out with the Dodgers?" And he said, "Yeah, go ahead." And Pete Reeser was managing the minor league Dodger team. So after a few ground balls and BP, and he wanted me to see how my arm was. He wanted me to bust some seats up in the bleachers, and he said, "Get your clothes and get on the bus. We're going to Kokomo." And I said, "Well, I don't have any clothes." He said, "I'll buy you some clothes." So after the game, I got on the bus with the team, went to Kokomo, Indiana. My dad and mother didn't know where I was at, and we didn't have a telephone at home, so I went over and signed with the Brooklyn Dodgers.
And how many years did you play professional baseball?
Well, back in those days, we had D, C, B, A, AA, AAA. And they told me when I signed, "Kid, it's going to take 5 years for you to get to the big leagues. That's what we plan on. And you're going to work your way up." So I went to D ball, C ball, B ball. I skipped A, went to AA, and then went to AAA. In the meantime, I spent a couple years in the military. And then when I come out, I went back to AAA ball. And I never played in the big leagues, but I played 10 years in minor leagues and wound up being a minor league manager, and here I am.
And what position did you play when you were a player?
I was a shortstop.
You were shortstop.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, I thought, my dad, when I signed with Brooklyn, he said, "Well, I'm glad you did because Pee Wee Reese is getting old." He didn't know they had 15 more right behind you.
Who are some other ball players that you have seen that made an impression on you?
Yeah, well, I've seen a lot of kids that made impressions, but, I signed another kid named David Need, N-I-E-D, a right-hand pitcher out of Texas. And that was my first experience with big money. Back when I was scouting, $10,000 was, the guy better play if you give him 10,000. So, and this kid wanted 85,000. I couldn't hardly say 85,000. I said, "Give it." But he had scholarships and all that. And my scouting director, Paul Snyder with the Braves, who is a great scout, he said, if you think he can play, we'll get that money somehow. And I said, Paul, I wouldn't be calling you if I didn't think this kid could play. He said, that's good enough. And we signed him, and eventually he went to the big leagues, and he was Colorado's first pick in the expansion draft. He wound up with the arm injury, but like that. And I signed a kid 1 year out of the University of Arkansas. People probably never heard of him much. Jimmy Kremers, Kremmers, catcher. And he was probably a 15-round pick. And I signed him because he was a catcher. If you hit, he had a chance. He went out and played a year, maybe two. And all of a sudden, I get a call from John Sherholz, I was with the Braves then. He said, hey, Montreal's got some interest in Jimmy Kremers. I said, well, that's good. He said, we got a chance to trade him for Otis Nixon. He said, would you do it? And I said, yeah, I sure would, John. So we wound up trading a 15-round pick for Otis Nixon, and he wound up being with us, so they were doing a good job. So things like that happen in scouting with kids you don't expect.
How did you learn how to scout? And is there anybody in particular that you say, this was the scout that I tried to model myself after, or this is somebody who taught me a lot about scouting?
Well, the favorite one of all time was Burt Wells, the old Dodger scout. He, I thought, was one of the greatest scouts that ever lived. And back in his days, him and Tom Greenway and Freddie Hahn, they were big competitors. And I think each one of them signed 50 or more big leaguers. And Burt knew me from playing the Dodger minor leagues. And when I went to scouting, he was the guy that took me under his wing and told me a lot of things to look for, how to work. And yeah, Burt Wells was my man.
Experience matters a lot in scouting. Can you tell me a time when your experience helped you when you were competing with another scout for a player, or trying to figure out how you needed to get your job done?
Well, I think one of the things that I learned back when I scouts didn't talk to each other. They didn't give information. You were pretty much on your own. And nowadays, with all the tournaments and games, you know, it's almost where you listen instead of scout more than we used to. And Burt Wells always told me, he said, Johnny, when you go to a ball game and you see a good player, don't forget there might be another good player. He said, if you're looking at a pitcher and you really like that pitcher, then keep your eye on that catcher. He's catching a pretty good pitcher. You know, he may be able to catch, you know, stuff like that. And he said, you know, don't be a performance scout. Don't look at, hey, this guy hit so-and-so or that. Look at tools, the ability, you know, because guys have good games, they have bad games. Hitters have slumps, pitchers have slumps. He said, look at the tools. It's the delivery, the swing, the bat speed, coordination of the infielder, the agility, you know, stuff like that. He said, because guys don't always have a good day when you go look at them. But don't walk away and say, hey, this guy went 0 for 4. You know, sometimes walk away and say, boy, that's a good-looking kid. So, you know, I think you learn that eventually. Most of these guys know that.